Okay, so in this lesson, we're going to look at factors of polynomials and long division. So basically in this lesson, our goal is the following. So you're going to determine if a polynomial is a factor of another polynomial using long division. So at the end of this lesson, you'll be able to answer something like this. So you'll be able to answer, is the polynomial 2x minus 1 a factor of this polynomial 4x cubed plus 6x squared minus 10x plus 4? And it's not a very difficult process. It's going to entail previous knowledge that you know about factors and also the fact that you now know how to deal with long division. Okay, so let's kind of review something though about factors. So this is going to be a quick review about factors. Okay, so review about factors. Okay, so remember, so recall, so the factors of 8, so let's talk about the factors of 8. So the factors of 8 are 1, and the factors of 8 are 1. 1's a factor of 8 because 1 times 8 equals 8, right? 2 is a factor of 8 because 2 times 4 is 8. 4 is a factor of 8 because, and we already have it right here, right? Because 4 times 2 is 8. 8 is a factor of itself. So remember, all numbers, so every number is a factor of itself. So 8's a factor of itself because of this idea right here, this product. So because 8 times 1 is 8. So in particular, if I have something like this, so first of all these are factors of 8. So those are the factors of 8. All right, so the other thing I want you to know about this is this. So if I did long division, let's say if I said 2 divided into 8, so 2 divided into 8 using long division, so I get 4. 4 times 2 is 8, and I get a remainder of 0, right? So there's your remainder. So remember, whenever the remainder is 0, that means that 8 is divisible by 2. So this means 8 is divisible by 2. Okay, which we can also say this. We can say that 2 divides into 8 evenly. In fact, we can say the same thing from all of these, couldn't we? So couldn't we say that 4 divides into 8, and I better go, if we talk about remainder, I better get a remainder of 0, right? So 4 into 8 is 2. 2 times 8 is 8, remainder of 0. So if a number is a factor of another number, and you do long division, you will get a remainder of 0. So here's a question though. So is 6 a factor of 8? So is 6 a factor of 8? Another way we can say this is this. Does 6 divide, D-I-V-I-D-E, divide into 8 evenly? All right, so if I do 6 into 8, 6 goes into 8 one time. 1 times 6 is 6, a remainder of 2, right? So since the remainder is not 0, since the remainder is not 0, then 6 is not a factor of 8. Oops, sorry. So 6 is not a factor of 8. Okay? So if we extend this now to polynomials, if we extend this idea, the idea with just numbers in particular, and we extend this to polynomials, that same idea occurs. So what I would need for you to remember is this. If a polynomial So let's say if a polynomial p of x is divided by another polynomial, and I'm going to call this h of x. So if a polynomial p of x is divided by another polynomial h of x, and the remainder is 0, and the remainder is 0, then h of x is a factor of p of x. All right, so basically you're saying if p of x is divided by h of x and you use long division, if the remainder is 0, then h of x is a factor of p of x. And that's the idea we're going to use. All right, so let's look at some examples with this. Okay, so the first example is determine if 2x minus 3, so the polynomial 2x minus 3 is a factor of the polynomial 2x squared plus 7x minus 15 using long division. So it's very important you follow directions. So the directions indicated to use long division. So you must use long division. So let's go ahead and use long division. Now remember, when using long division, you got to make sure that any missing term, you're going to use a 0 term. I don't have any missing terms here, and I don't have any missing terms here. And also that they must be in descending order, and they are. So you're going to do this. You're going to say 2x minus 3 divided into 2x squared plus 7x minus 15. Okay, so let's go and use long division. So 2x into 2x squared will, so remember when you studied this previously, so you'd say 2x squared divided by 2x. When you reduce this, simplify this, that's just x, right? So you get x. So x times 2x is 2x squared. Now remember, if you're doing this correctly, these two better be the same, so that when you subtract, they cancel out. X times a negative 3 is a negative 3x. All right, and so the next step is to subtract. Now remember our process, so if you need to write out the equivalent expression of this right here, then go ahead and do that. So the opposite of 2x squared is a negative 2x squared. The opposite of a negative 3x is a positive 3x. And so basically you're saying 2x squared and a negative 2x squared is 0. 7x and a positive 3x is 10x. And then you bring on the next term. 2x into 10x is going to be 5. If you're doing this correctly, 5 times 2x better be 10x, right? And then 5 times negative 3 is a negative 15. And then if you subtract, remember you're saying 10x minus 10x is 0. That has to always be true, just like this was. If you have a little bit difficulty determining negative 15 minus negative 15, then just like we did here, just write out the equivalent expression. So the opposite of 10x is negative 10x, and the opposite of negative 15 is a positive 15. And notice that as with this one, this cancels out, but also notice that negative 15 and positive 15 is 0. Now remember, we brought down our very last term, and so always, just as our discussion in the previous lesson, this is a constant. The degree of a constant is 0. The degree of my divisor is 1. You stop using long division whenever the degree of the remainder is less than the degree of the divisor. So since the degree of my remainder, which is a constant, is 0, and this is 1, so since that's less, I stop. But notice, though, that the remainder is 0, right? That's my remainder. And based on our discussion in the previous page, if the remainder is 0, then that means that the divisor is a factor of the dividend. The divisor is a factor of the dividend. Here, the divisor is not a factor of the dividend because the remainder is not 0. So what we can say here is this. Since the remainder is 0, we can now say this. So therefore, 2x minus 3 is a factor of x squared, 2x squared rather, sorry, 2x squared, just rewriting this over, plus 7x minus 15. In fact, I just want to remind you about something. So we're done with this problem, but I just want to remind you about something. See, this is an easy trinomial, right? And so if you factor this, and it is factorable, if you factor this, I want you to see something. So if we factor 2x squared plus 7x minus 15, we get 2x minus 3 times x, and I think it's plus 5, x plus 5. So remember, these are your factors. So there you go. So is 2x minus 3 a factor of this? Yes, because it's factorable as 2x minus 3 times x plus 5. In fact, x plus 5 is also a factor of this, isn't it? So in fact, x plus 5 is also a factor of 2x squared plus 7x minus 15. Okay? So basically, whenever you're given the situation, use long division. If you get a remainder of 0, then your divisor is a factor of your dividend. If it's not a remainder of 0, then your divisor is not a factor of the dividend. The other thing I want to indicate about this, see how we said 2x minus 3 is a factor of 2x squared plus 7x minus 15? I also want you to know this. So also this means that 2x minus 3 divides into 2x squared plus 7x minus 15 evenly. Okay, oops, sorry. So that also means that 2x minus 3 divides into 2x squared plus 7x minus 15 evenly. Okay? All right, so let's look at number 2. So number 2, let's suppose we had this. Number 2, so let's look at this problem for number 2. Okay, so determine if 3x minus 2 is a factor of 6x cubed minus 16x squared plus 17x minus 8. All right, so let's use long division, and remember it's going to say using long division. All right, and so you're going to say 3x minus 2 divided into, and there's no missing terms, and it's already in descending order, 6x cubed minus 16x squared plus 17x minus 8. All right, so 3x will go into 6x cubed. So 3 goes into 6 2 times, x goes into x cubed, x squared times, so it'll be 2x squared. So we put 2x squared here. If you're doing this correctly, whatever you put here, when you multiply this by this, you better get 6x cubed, right? Because those have to cancel out. So 2x squared times 3x is 6x cubed. 2x squared times a negative 2 is a negative 4x squared. Okay, and then you're going to subtract. So 6x cubed minus 6x cubed, that's 0. If you're having a little trouble with this one, then I'm going to suggest that you write out the equivalent expression here. The opposite of 6x cubed is a negative 6x cubed. The opposite of a negative 4x squared is a positive 4x squared. So I just want you to remember a negative 16x squared minus or subtract a negative 4x squared means the same thing as negative 16x squared plus 4x squared. And so when I combine those like terms, a negative 16 and a positive 4 is a negative 12. So I'm going to get a negative 12x squared. Let's go and bring down the next term. 3x into negative 12x squared is a negative 4x. Put that here. And then you do the multiplication all over again. Negative 4x times 3x. If you're doing this correctly, you better get negative 12x squared. Negative 4x times 3x is a negative 12x squared. Negative 4x times a negative 2 is a positive 8x. And then you subtract. And so negative 12x squared, subtract a negative 12x squared, that's 0. 17x subtract 8x, that's going to be, what's that, 9x? All right, so you can get 9x. And then you bring on the next term. You do the division all over again. 3x into 9x is a positive 3. 3 times 3x is 9x. You better get 9x here so they can cancel out. 3 times negative 2 is a negative 6, and then you subtract. 9x minus 9x is 0, so you see all these cancel out, the first ones of each pair. Now be careful here. If you have a little trouble with this, then write out in red the equivalent expression. The opposite of 9x is negative 9x. The opposite of a negative 6 is a positive 6. And then when you either subtract or combine like terms, a negative 8 subtract negative 6 means the same thing as negative 8 plus positive 6, which is a negative 2. And notice there's nothing else to bring down, so there's your remainder. There's your remainder. And notice the remainder is not 0, right? Since the remainder is not 0, I'm going to put 0 like this. Since the remainder is not 0, then this means 3x minus 2 is not a factor of, so that means that the divisor is not a factor of the dividend. So that means that 3x minus 2 is not a factor of this. So it's not a factor of 6x cubed minus 16x squared plus 17x minus 8. Okay? All right. Let's do a couple more, and I think you should be fine with this concept. Okay, so let's look at that one. So determine if x squared plus 6 is a factor of 6x cubed minus 4x squared plus 6x minus 24. All right, so we're going to do long division. So x squared plus 6. Oops, sorry, there's a missing term, right? So you need a 0 term. So we're going to say x squared plus 0x plus 6. There's no missing term here, and everything's in descending order. So x cubed minus 4x squared plus 6x minus 24. So this is your divisor, this is your dividend. So you're asking, is this divisor a factor of this dividend? All right, so let's use long division. X squared into x cubed goes a factor of x times. So I'm going to put the x here. Remember your line, you like variables, you like terms. X times x squared is x cubed. Remember, all this is supposed to be the same. X times 0x is 0x squared. Always write as 0x squared, so that way everything's aligned. X times 6 is 6x. Okay, and then you're going to subtract. X cubed minus x cubed is 0. A negative 4x squared minus 0x squared is a negative 4x squared. 6x minus 6x is 0 as well. All right, so don't put the 0 here, just bring on the next term. Okay, just like that. And then you do the division all over again. X squared into negative 4x squared is a negative 4. Negative 4 times x squared is a negative 4x squared. That has to be the same as this one, doesn't it? A negative 4 times 0x is, well, I guess we should have put the 0x here. So I'm going to put 0x here. All right, so that way it's going to be aligned. So negative 4 times 0x is negative or positive 0x. It does not matter whether 0 or negative since it's 0. A negative 4 times a positive 6 is a negative 24. Okay? And then you subtract. So it's a subtract. Now be careful. A negative 4x minus a negative, negative 4x squared minus a negative 4x squared. That means the same thing as saying, remember, this is the opposite of negative 4x squared is positive 4x squared. So that means, so negative 4x squared minus a negative 4x squared, or subtract negative 4x squared, means the same thing as negative 4x squared plus 4x squared, and that is 0. 0x subtract 0x is 0. I'm not going to put it here. A negative 24 subtract a negative 24, that's 0. I'm going to put the 0 here because that's the remainder. That's going to be the last thing I do. And there you go. So the remainder is 0. Remainder 0. And so since the remainder is 0, remember what that means. So since the remainder is 0, x squared plus 6 is a factor of, oops, so x squared plus 6 is a factor of x cubed minus 4x squared plus 6x minus 24. All right. So if the remainder is not 0, then you say the divisor, and use this one. The divisor is not a factor of this, the dividend. If the remainder is 0, then you say this is a factor of this. All right, so let's look at one more. Oh, and by the way, so remember what also this means. So also this means that x squared plus 6 divides into, so the divisor divides into the dividend evenly, okay, evenly. So this means that x squared plus 6 divides into x cubed minus 4x squared plus 6x minus 24 evenly, okay? All right, so let's look at one more. Okay, so let's look at this one. So determine if 2t plus 1 divides into 8t cubed plus 14t plus 8 evenly. So we're going to go ahead and use long division. And notice, so there is a missing term here, right? So the t squared term is missing, so I'm going to need to put a 0 term there as a placeholder. There is no missing term here, so I'm going to say 2t plus 1 divided into 8t cubed plus 0t squared, so there's my missing term, so you need that placeholder, and then plus 14t, and then plus 8. All right, so remember, just as we discussed with factors, so notice that the remainder was 0 right here, right? So that means that x squared plus 6 is a factor of this, which also means that this divides into this evenly. So the remainder 0, when you do long division, if the remainder is 0, then that means that the divisor divides into the dividend evenly. All right, so all we got to do is to determine what the remainder is. Okay, so 2t into 8t cubed will go, what's that, 4t squared times? So remember we're saying 8t cubed divided into 2t, and if I reduce that, that's 4t squared. So let's put the 4t squared here. You'll make sure you align your like terms. And then 4t squared times 2t is going to be 8t cubed. Doing this correctly, remember all these have to be the same when you do each of those pairs so they can cancel out. 4t times 1 is 4t squared. So plus 4t squared. And now you're going to subtract. 8t cubed minus 8t cubed, that's 0. 0t squared minus 4t squared is a negative 4t squared. Right on the next term. And then you do division all over again. 2t into negative 4t squared is a negative 2t. Negative 2t times 2t is a negative 4t squared. So if we're doing this correctly, whatever you put here, you multiply by the first here, better be the same as this right here, and it is, because those have to cancel out. A negative 2t times 1 is a negative 2t. Okay, and then you subtract. Now this is where you may want to rewrite this expression so you don't get confused. So negative 4t squared subtract a negative 4t squared means the same thing as negative 4t squared plus 4t squared. Because remember, the opposite of negative 4t squared is a positive 4t squared. The opposite of a negative 2t is a positive 2t. So that's 0 right here. 14t subtract negative 2t means the same thing as 14t plus 2t, which is 16t. You did not need to put that plus symbol here. And then you bring on the next term. 2t into 16t is 8. 8 times 2t is 16t. 8 times 1 is 8. And notice that if I subtract these, this and this is exactly the same. So when I subtract them, I'm going to get a remainder of 0. So there's your remainder. Okay? And so since the remainder of 0, since the remainder is 0, then remember what that means. That means that the divisor goes into the dividend evenly. So then 2t rather, 2t plus 1 divides into 8t cubed plus 14t plus 8 evenly. Okay? All right, so that is this topic on determine if a polynomial is a factor of another polynomial using long division. So it's not a very difficult concept. It's fairly easy to understand. And this idea is going to bring us into something later on that deals with the factor theorem. So we're going to talk about the factor theorem um, in the next lesson or so. And so we're going to come back and talk about this lesson as well. So that's the end of this lesson.